10 years ago, we were ranching in western South Dakota, and we were running basically just a beef cow-calf operation, selling some bulls. In western South Dakota, in the county that we were in, had a population of 2,000 people. Everybody was directly tied to agriculture in some way, shape, or form, other than just eating the products that we produce. Because I'm one that believes that 310 million Americans are all directly involved in agriculture. Well, only those that eat food, wear clothing, utilize pharmaceuticals, or fuel. The rest of them are just out to lunch. Lunch for some critter, but that's another story. Anyway, I'm standing in the middle of a speech that James Cromwell is giving, and James Cromwell is a British actor. He was in the movie Babe. You'd know him if you saw him. And he was speaking to 300 people in West River, South Dakota, talking about how he was going to chase livestock agriculture from United States soil. And his reasoning was that he was riding his Harley-Davidson on Highway 54 into southwest Kansas and into Oklahoma. And he said the stink and the smell from the hog and cattle factories was so bad, he had to turn around and go the other way. And he decided right then and there that he was going to do whatever it takes to put animal agriculture out of business. I first thought it was ironic that he made the statement that he was going to chase hogs from the country when he was riding a Harley-Davidson, something we consider to be a hog, but spoke to the hypocriticalness that we often hear from that community. But more importantly, even in this rural county, rural part of the country, where everybody is directly tied to livestock agriculture, I saw on the faces of the individuals present how if somebody says something, you hear it differently. And in fact, you believe what you say, even if you know it's not true, if you tell yourself that enough. And I went home that night and I said, Kelly, to my wife, I said, Kelly, if he continues to travel this country telling people that we no longer need animal agriculture, and there's not someone with hands-on experience explaining why we need animal agriculture, they're going to begin to believe him. 7 days later, I walked into a radio studio in Spearfish, South Dakota. A gentleman's name is Jim Thompson. And I said, hi, my name is Trent Loos, 6th generation United States farmer, and I want my own radio show. He looked at me and laughed, and he said, yeah, you and every other American. And I sat down. He said, you're serious? I said, sir, I'm not leaving until we get a deal. Long story short, 3 months later, we began producing a radio show together. 6 months later, I began producing Loose Tales. Loose Tales was a daily look at telling the story of production agriculture. And after 2 years, driving up and down the road, wherever I went, if I saw a radio station, I stopped, walked in, introduced myself, and told them that I was producing this radio program called Loose Tales, where I told the story of production agriculture. And after 2 years, I had 12 AM farm radio stations. What's the problem with that scenario? Not a rhetorical question completely. We're still preaching to the choir, right? Now, although the choir needs to get louder, and that is what you're here about, and I think that we have more people in the choir singing today, because 10 years ago, quite frankly, when I was out telling the story that we need to tell the story of agriculture, it was somewhat of a lonely journey. And now everybody understands the need to do that. But then I made just by accident, I made a great discovery. I was in Washington, D.C., meeting with John Doyle with the Center for Consumer Freedom, and we finished our meeting, and I got done. I said, I'm going to go down to National Public Radio, and I'm going to see if I can't get Loose Tales on the air. And John Doyle looks at me and he says, well, do you have an appointment? I said, a what? He said, well, you can't get through that iron curtain without an appointment. I said, sir, you obviously don't understand the power of a black hat, do you? Well, long story short, I did get that appointment with a young lady who's in charge of programming for National Public Radio. I told her my name was Trent Loos, 6th generation United States farmer. I produce this radio program called Loose Tales, where I tell the story of production agriculture. She looks me right in the eye and she said, sir, we can't talk about agriculture on NPR, it's boring. There's one person that listens to NPR. I came home thinking agriculture is boring. The conversion of natural resources into human consumable products Mankind does not exist without food, fiber, pharmaceuticals, and fuel that come from agriculture. And here the program director for the National Public Radio can tell me they can't talk about agriculture because it's boring. The next time I went into a radio station, and I remember it clearly, it was in Omaha, Nebraska. I walked in, said, "Hi, my name is Trent Loos, 6th generation United States farmer, and I produce this radio program called Loose Tales, where I identify the people and places in rural America that truly make it what it is." "Oh, you mean like a cowboy Charles Kuralt?" "Yeah." 8 years later, you can hear Loose Tales on 100 radio stations in 19 states. About 4 million people a day hear it. Thank you. But that wasn't a braggadocious statement. What's the message? What's the all of us take-home message in there? We have to position what it is that we care about in a way that people think they can relate to. Nobody thought they were involved in agriculture. Everybody thought we don't need to talk about the farm because people don't farm. But everybody romances about rural America and the human interest side. And we talk about being better advocates. The most important part of being an advocate is stepping up and saying, "Here's who I am and what I do." The biggest problem that I have when I travel this country speaking to 50,000 people in agriculture each year is that there'll be a certain percentage of you are going to come up afterwards, unless I kill it right now, and say, "Well, I'd like to, but, well, Trent, I just don't have the gift of gab that you do," or I didn't get a PhD or even a bachelor's at Michigan State University." I don't care. You are an expert in your own experiences, whatever those experiences might be. And quite frankly, in the past 150 years, we have taken a very primitive agricultural system that didn't change for 2,000 years, to be frank. And then in 1862, we established the United States Department of Agriculture. We established the land grant system. And starting in 1940, we began revolutionizing how we produce food. And today, the United States farm and ranch system is the most efficient in the world, where the everyday 310 million Americans go to the grocery store. They spend less than 10% of their disposable income on food each year and never wonder if there's going to be food available because of what you have accomplished in agriculture. So the other thing that we have to learn to do, that I've learned, in fact, the first lesson came right here in Detroit, is that we don't typically speak in jargon and language that the non-farm folks understand. We have our own vocabulary that is way out there, okay? I told you that we have goats at the house. And we always kid goats somewhere in December around the 1st of January. And every single time I fly, the last thing that I do before they shut that door is call my wife, Kelly, and see how things are going. Well, the other day I got on the plane in Detroit. I remember I was flying to Reno. Sat down in the seat on the plane, called home, and I said, "Honey, did we have any more kids today?" "Another set of triplets?" Well, needless to say, when I hung up the phone, the lady sitting next to me wasn't very proud of me that my wife was home having triplets and I was there on the airplane with her. Keeping in mind that we do say a lot of things. And I'm a slow learner because just 2 weeks ago, I weaned 3 sows before I left the house, flying through Chicago O'Hare. I had semen in the basement. Sows are weaned. Kelly heat checks the sows. When they're in good standing heat, she's supposed to inseminate the sows. Standing in the middle of Chicago O'Hare, I asked her about the sows, and she said, "Well, they're just really not standing good," and I just blurted out, "Well, I wouldn't waste a semen on them." And I looked around, there's like 12 people ready to go get TSA to get this wacko out of the Chicago airport. We do that every day, and I'm thinking about all of the things that we say regularly that they would never understand. Things like, "I knew we should have castrated those guys last week." "Well, just call the doc and we'll get them semen tested." You know, they don't get that, George. They're not veterinarians with the USDA. They could be school teachers and they wouldn't get that. And then I was at the Arkansas Poultry Festival last June. I'm sitting over the audience thinking, thank God I wasn't a chicken breeder. I'd be there in the airport saying, "Well, we've been breeding them to have larger breasts, bigger thighs, and plumper legs." So if we are truly going to take on the task of telling the story of agriculture, the first thing we must learn, position what we do in a way that matters to people that don't think they're involved. And number two, speak in a language that they can relate to. We need to be leaders in explaining that we have implemented the best in science and technology to use fewer resources to feed, clothe, provide pharmaceuticals and fuel to more people. I see some young folks here. We need to continue to encourage the next generation to be a part of this industry, not for economic reasons, but because we improve mankind that way. I want to tell you just two quick stories about my own daughter, who Libby is now 12, but 4 years ago she had this beef speech that she gave in 4-H, and she was really good for an 8-year-old. I don't know, some reason she likes to stand up in front of a group, grab a microphone, and give a speech, but I think it's an environment thing, Lori, come to think of it. And I was asked to speak at the Red Cloud FFA banquet on a Friday evening, and I said, Libby, I want you to just go along with me. It's only 2 hours from our house, so we're driving down there. And I said, no, she's 8. And I said, Libby, would you like to give your beef speech? Oh, I don't know, Dad. We'll see. It's like a 3-minute beef speech. And we get there, and we walk in the gymnasium. There's 200 people. She looks at me, and she says, Dad, I don't want to give my speech. I said, okay, if you change your mind, just let me know. Before they introduced me, they introduced a young lady who was the region vice president for the National FFA from Stewart, Nebraska, named Anita Estes. She got up and she gave a speech on why you should be involved in FFA, and she was so articulate, she was inspirational. But about halfway through that speech, unbeknownst to her, there was an 8-year-old girl who leaned over to her dad and said, Dad, I've changed my mind. I want to give my speech. And when Anita got done, they introduced me, and I said, you know what, before I start, Libby came with me tonight, and she would like to share a few words with you. She got up, she grabbed the microphone with a cadence unlike she'd ever done before. She gave a speech about the importance of zinc, iron, and protein in improving human lives, because she was inspired by a young lady who was 20 years old by her actions. We have the ability to infect other people with positive actions every single day if we just put ourselves out of our own comfort zone and do things that are not comfortable. You never know who might be watching and how you might impact them in a positive way. And a final story happened to me 2 weeks ago in South Dakota when I was speaking at the South Dakota Rural Water Association. There was a guy there I'd never met before. He listens to Loose Tales on WNAX out of Yankton, South Dakota, and he came up and he said, hi, my name's Alvin Kangas. I'm from Watertown, South Dakota. I'm with the Sioux Rural Water District, where we won the award for the best tasting rural water in the nation last year. That's how he introduced himself. Well, I thought that was intriguing. So I got off my recorder off my hip, I always carry with me. I did a little 3-minute Loose Tales radio program talking to Alvin Kangas, who was so proud to tell me about the Sioux Rural Water System that won the award for the best tasting rural water in the nation last year. That aired. And the next day, they had their entire awards assembly. And the person who was recognizing the groups and the districts for the year of doing a great job had to throw in a punchline every time making fun of Alvin Kangas, because he said, I think I was at 12 different district meetings this year, and Alvin was always there, and he was always talking about how Sioux Rural Water was the best tasting rural water in the nation. And about 5 minutes later, he introduced the winner of this year's South Dakota Rural Water Best Tasting Award. Why don't you guess who won? There's no way anybody's going to beat Sioux Rural Water as long as you've got one champion who every day wears proudly on his sleeve that I represent the best tasting rural water in the nation. He single-handedly has created this perception that I don't know who's going to tear down. And quite frankly, I think that is the exact role model for how we do what Denise talked about in shaping public opinion about the importance of American agriculture, the importance to Michigan and the Michigan citizens that farmers and ranchers do not have the barriers of business that prevent us from continuing to be the efficient food producer unlike anybody else in the world. When it comes to the consumer, we have done it right. We need to be the leaders and continue to make it better for that generation.